Could you define narcissism for us?
Yeah, there are different ways of defining it. With the book, I try to be a bit more expansive in my understanding of it, right? Because there's that sort of narrow DSM-5 definition, right? Sort of the classic psychological definition that gets at attributes like grandiosity, entitlement, attention seeking, low empathy, which is always a new one for people when they're thinking about narcissism, because they think of the power and the entitlement, but they don't think of that low empathy that we see in classically narcissistic folks. And then we also generally see what we call relational and vocational impairments. In other words, if you're elevated on the narcissistic spectrum, you're bound to encounter conflict in your life, let's just say, right? And so there's that sort of classical definition that emphasizes grandiosity. I happen to think that narcissism shows up in a number of different forms, and we can almost go back to Genesis chapter 3, right? And that's where I sort of begin that conversation with that sense of control that you see right there in seed form in Genesis 3, right? And that control can show up in lots of different ways in our lives. We can control aggressively and we can control passive aggressively, right? When we talk about narcissism, we're not talking about some sort of disease. We're talking about something that emerges out of the trauma of one's life. And so it becomes sort of a way of coping in the world when it doesn't feel like there's any other way of coping. But it looks a lot like that grasping of Adam and Eve that we see in the garden.